Before they lived in the White House, before they had Secret Service, motorcades, and global power, they were just ordinary people. Some grew up in poverty, some worked impossible jobs, some were raised by single parents, and some came from privilege, but still had to fight their own battles. Today, you'll discover how US presidents lived before they ruled the country. Their struggles, their first jobs, their failures, and the crazy paths that led them to the Oval Office. Let's begin. Theodore Roosevelt, 1901 to 1909. The sick child who became a warrior. Roosevelt was born into a wealthy family, but with terrible health. He was fragile, asthmatic, and doctors said he'd never live a normal life. So he rebuilt himself through sheer will, boxing, hunting, climbing mountains. Before becoming president, he worked as a cowboy in North Dakota, a writer, a police commissioner, and an anti-corruption fighter. He went from weak child to toughest president in US history. His motto, do what you can with what you have, where you are. William Howard Taft, 1909 to 1913. The lawyer who wanted to be a judge. Taft didn't even want to be president. He wanted a quiet life, being a judge. He worked as a courthouse reporter, a lawyer, a legal advisor, a federal judge. But politics kept pulling him back. His mother famously said, "Will doesn't want to be president, but he will be someday." She was right. Woodrow Wilson, 1913 to 1921. The Professor President Wilson grew up in a poor Southern family and learned to read late, around age 10. He struggled academically, but eventually became a professor, a university president, and a political reformer. Imagine the US electing a university nerd as president today. Warren Harding, 1921 to 1923. The newspaper kid Harding came from a simple rural family. His first job, working in a small-town newspaper. He became the owner, editor, and salesman, sometimes all on the same day. No fancy education, just pure hustle. Calvin Coolidge, 1923 to 1929. From farmer to President, Coolidge grew up on a farm in Vermont. No electricity, no luxury, just hard work. He started as a store clerk, a teacher, a lawyer. People called him Silent Cal because he barely talked. Imagine, a silent president in today's world. Herbert Hoover, 1929 to 1933. Orphan to millionaire, Hoover's childhood was brutal. He lost both parents by the age of 9. He worked as a miner's assistant, a manual laborer, an engineer traveling the world. By 40, he was a millionaire. From orphan to global success, a true American story. Franklin D. Roosevelt, 1933 to 1945, and the privileged fighter FDR came from a rich family, but life hit him hard. He became paralyzed from the waist down at age 39. Before the presidency, he was a lawyer, a senator, assistant secretary of the Navy. His comeback from paralysis inspired the whole nation. Harry Truman, 1945 to 1953. The poor farmer with thick glasses. Truman grew up on a farm and was too poor to go to college. He worked as a farmer, a bank clerk, a failed businessman, a World War I artillery captain. Nothing in his early life suggested future president. Dwight Eisenhower, 1953 to 1961. And you say he was the kid who wanted to be a baseball player. Eisenhower came from a poor Kansas family. He loved sports, worked in a cream factory, and dreamed of baseball. He entered West Point because it was free, and became a 5-star general. John F. Kennedy, 1961 to 1963. Wealth, war, and pain. JFK was rich, but sick his entire life. Chronic pain, hospital beds, and near-death experiences were normal for him. He served in World War II and almost died saving his crew. His strength didn't come from money, it came from courage. Lyndon Johnson, 1963 to 1969. From extreme poverty to power, LBJ grew up in rural Texas with no electricity or running water. He worked as a teacher for poor Mexican-American children, a clerk, a congressional assistant. He never forgot childhood poverty, and which shaped his politics. Richard Nixon, 1969 to 1974. The super poor grocery store boy Nixon grew up in a family so poor he studied by kerosene lamp. He worked as a gas station attendant, a store clerk, a janitor, a lawyer. His childhood was filled with hardship and loss, yet he climbed to the top. Gerald Ford, 1974 to 1977. The boy who escaped an abusive father. Ford grew up in a tough household and worked many jobs. Dishwasher, waiter, model. Yes, he was a model. Football star. He learned discipline through sports, and it saved him. Jimmy Carter, 1977 to 1981. The peanut farmer Carter literally ran a peanut business. Before politics, he was a farmer, a factory worker, a naval engineer. He rose from rural poverty to the White House. Ronald Reagan, 1981 to 1989. The lifeguard who saved 77 people. Before Ronald Reagan became President of the United States, before he became the face of the 1980s, before he stood in Berlin telling the Soviet Union to tear down a wall, he was just a small-town kid from Illinois with a summer job. And that job turned him into a real-life superhero. Reagan worked as a lifeguard, and according to local records, he saved 77 people from drowning. Yes, 77. Most presidents can barely save their approval ratings, and this guy was out here saving an entire lake population. That was only chapter 1. He then became a radio sports announcer, famous for making baseball sound exciting even when nothing was happening. Then Hollywood called, and Reagan became a movie star, acting in more than 50 films. Later, he became the president of the Screen Actors Guild, fighting for better conditions for actors, while also arguing with a monkey in one of his movies. Yes, really. From lifeguard to Hollywood actor to governor to president, Reagan's journey proves one thing. Sometimes the path to the White House starts with sunscreen, a whistle, and pulling 77 people out of a lake. George H.W. Bush, 1989 to 1993. Nato. The oil millionaire who started with nothing before George H.W. Bush became president, before he became a CIA director, before he became the father of another president. He was just a young man with big dreams and an empty wallet. Despite later being known as the oil millionaire, Bush didn't start with money. After serving as a World War II Navy pilot, he left the military determined to build a life completely on his own. No family fortune, no political connections, no safety net. His first job, a door-to-door salesman, traveling around in worn-out suits, trying to convince people to buy equipment they didn't even know they needed. Imagine that, a future president knocking on doors like, "Hello, ma'am, may I interest you in, your future commander-in-chief?" But Bush wasn't done failing forward. He moved to Texas, jumped into the oil industry, and lost money more times than he wanted to admit. His early companies struggled, his wells ran dry, and competition crushed him repeatedly. But each failure made him tougher. Eventually, he struck success, turning small oil ventures into a thriving business. And the kid who once knocked on doors became a self-made millionaire. From fighter pilot to broke salesman to oil entrepreneur to President of the United States. George H.W. Bush's life proves that even future presidents sometimes start by hearing the word no 1,000 times before the world finally says yes. Bill Clinton, 1993 to 2001, the poor kid from Arkansas. Before Bill Clinton became president, before the saxophone, the charisma, and the famous speeches, he was just a kid from a tiny town in Arkansas growing up with almost nothing. Clinton's childhood was tough. His family struggled financially, and the house was often filled with arguments, stress, and instability. Money was so tight that luxury meant having a quiet evening, but young Bill had something stronger than money: ambition. His first jobs were humble. He worked as a part-time student mentor, helping younger kids with school. Then as a law clerk, running errands, organizing documents, and doing whatever nobody else wanted to do. And of course, he spent countless hours as a campaign volunteer, shaking hands, knocking on doors, and learning the political world from the absolute bottom. What made Clinton different wasn't privilege, it was determination. He studied like crazy, graduated from Georgetown, won a scholarship to Oxford, and then went to Yale Law School. All from a boy who started with nothing but drive and a secondhand suitcase. From a broken home, but to the governor's mansion, to the Oval Office, Bill Clinton became the definition of from nothing to everything. His story proves that your beginnings don't define your future, your persistence does. George W. Bush, 2001 to 2009. The late bloomer people often assumed George W. Bush had an easy path, wealthy family, political connections, famous last name. But his journey to the presidency was anything but easy. Bush spent years trying to figure out who he wanted to be, and let's just say, it took him a while. His early career was a collection of glorious failures. He jumped into the oil business with big dreams and big confidence, and the oil business immediately responded with, "Nice try, George." His companies collapsed more than once, leaving him with experience, but not much profit. Then he became a baseball team owner, which sounds glamorous, until you realize the team wasn't exactly winning trophies. Still, Bush loved it. He joked later that it was the most fun he ever had before politics, and with fewer critics. But here's the twist. Bush didn't give up. He reinvented himself over and over. Eventually, he turned to public service and became the governor of Texas, where he finally found his voice and his confidence. And from there, the late bloomer bloomed fast, very fast, from failed oilman to baseball boss to governor to President of the United States. George W. Bush proved that success doesn't always come early, but if you keep moving, it eventually does come. Barack Obama, 2009 to 2017. The community organizer before Barack Obama became the first African-American president in US history. Before the Nobel Prize, the global fame, and the iconic speeches, he was just a kid trying to make sense of a complicated world. Obama grew up in a very unusual family situation, raised mostly by a single mother and his grandparents. He moved between Hawaii, Indonesia, and back again. He didn't grow up with privilege, money, or political connections. He grew up with books, curiosity, and a stubborn belief that life could be better. One of his first jobs, scooping ice cream at Baskin-Robbins. He later joked that the job destroyed his love for ice cream because his hands were always freezing. Considering how many photos exist of him eating ice cream today, this was clearly a lie. But his real transformation began in Chicago. Instead of choosing a high-paying job after college, he chose community organizing, working with poor families, struggling neighborhoods, and people who felt ignored by the system. This job didn't come with glamour, fancy suits, or headlines. It came with long days, tough conversations, and the question, how do we help people who feel forgotten? From there, Obama went to Harvard Law School, not just to study, but to lead. He became the first black president of the Harvard Law Review, a position so competitive that it often went to students with far richer backgrounds. After graduating, he returned to Chicago and taught constitutional law, becoming that one professor students said was cool because he actually listened. But he didn't stop there. He entered politics as a state senator, driving himself to small-town meetings in a beat-up car, speaking to rooms with 5 people and a folding chair. He lost elections. He got ignored. He got underestimated constantly. And then, the momentum shifted. He became a US senator, gave a speech that electrified the nation, and eventually launched a presidential campaign that changed American politics forever. From a boy raised by a single mother, to an ice cream scooper, to a community organizer, to a law professor, to a senator, to a history-making president. Barack Obama's story is a reminder that greatness doesn't require the perfect beginning, just the courage to keep moving forward. Donald Trump, the billionaire who refused to quit before Donald stepped into the White House. Before the political rallies, the headlines, the controversies, and the global spotlight, he lived one of the wildest, most unpredictable, and most dramatic lives of any future president. Trump was born into a wealthy family, yes, but unlike many rich kids, he didn't sit still. His father put him to work early, sending him to construction sites as a teenager. Workers joke that Trump's first real education was learning how to shout over bulldozers. After business school, Trump jumped into New York real estate. the toughest, most unforgiving industry in America. His early projects were small, but then he made his first big move, taking over the Commodore Hotel and transforming it into the Grand Hyatt. It shocked the industry. Trump was just a young guy with a massive ego and even bigger dreams, and somehow it actually worked. But life wasn't a straight climb upward. Trump built skyscrapers, casinos, golf courses, and then watched many of them collapse financially. He went from billionaire to nearly bankrupt to billionaire again. His financial life was like a roller coaster built by a man who forgot to read the instructions. Still, Trump had one unusual talent. He was a master of reinvention. When business collapsed, he reinvented himself as a public personality. When casinos failed, he built a brand empire. When nobody took him seriously, he launched The Apprentice. And suddenly, he wasn't just a businessman. He was a celebrity. "You're fired" became a national catchphrase. His books became bestsellers, and his name appeared on everything from steaks to bottled water to a university that didn't go too well. But love him or hate him, Trump did what nobody predicted. He transformed himself from a real estate figure into a political powerhouse. Most politicians start small: school boards, city councils, local offices. Trump skipped all of that. No baby steps, just one giant leap: businessman, TV star, president of the United States. His journey was messy, loud, dramatic, and absolutely unforgettable. From building skyscrapers, to surviving bankruptcies, to creating a global brand, to winning one of the most shocking elections in modern history, Donald Trump proved that the path to power can be anything but traditional, and that sometimes the most unlikely route is the one that works. Joe Biden, 2021 to 2025. The stutterer who refused to stay down before Joe Biden became president, before he became one of the most influential politicians of the last 50 years, before he won the most votes of any candidate in US history. He was just a boy from Scranton, Pennsylvania, who struggled to say even a simple sentence. Biden grew up in a working class family. No wealth, no privilege. Sometimes money was so tight that the family had to move in with relatives. But the toughest part of his childhood wasn't poverty. It was his severe stutter. He was bullied, mocked, and humiliated. Kids called him Joey B-Biba Biden. Teachers laughed when he tried to read aloud. He once said that the stutter felt like a cage that trapped every word in his mouth. But Biden refused to give up. He stood in front of the mirror for hours, reciting poetry, practicing speeches, and training his mouth to obey him. He memorized rhythm, practiced breathing, and pushed through the pain. Slowly, word by word, he broke free. As a teenager, Biden worked odd jobs: lifeguard at a local pool, landscaping, supermarket work, boiler room maintenance. Nothing glamorous, just the grind. But being a lifeguard changed him. He learned how to talk to people, how to listen, and how to lead. For the first time, he felt confidence instead of fear. Biden went on to study law, and after graduating, he worked as a public defender, a volunteer lawyer for the poor, a small-town councilman. No fame, no spotlight, just service. Then at 29, he did the impossible. He became one of the youngest US senators in history. But life hit him harder than any election ever could. Just weeks after the victory, Biden's wife and daughter were killed in a car accident. His two sons were badly injured. Biden was shattered. He planned to quit politics forever, but he didn't. He took the oath of office in a hospital room next to his sons' beds. He spent decades taking the train to Washington every day so he could tuck his children into bed every night. For 36 years straight, rain, snow, or exhaustion, he rode the same commuter train. They called him Amtrak Joe. He rebuilt his life piece by piece. He remarried. He became vice president. He faced new tragedies, including the death of his son, Beau, another blow that nearly broke him. Most people would have walked away. Biden stepped forward. In 2020, at the age of 77, he launched a presidential campaign that nearly everyone called impossible. Too old, too weak, too slow, too outdated. But the boy who once couldn't speak, the man who lost so much, the father who rebuilt his family from ashes, won the presidency with the largest number of votes ever received in American history. His story is not about perfection, fame, or power. It's about survival, about getting up again and again when life hits harder than politics ever could. From a struggling kid with a speech disorder, to a lifeguard, to a public defender, to senator, to vice president, to president. Joe Biden's life proves that leadership isn't born. It's forged through pain, persistence, and a stubborn refusal to stay down. From cowboys to lawyers, from orphans to millionaires, from peanut farmers to Hollywood actors. Every president had a story, a struggle, a beginning. They weren't born powerful. They became powerful through work, failure, discipline, and stubbornness. Now tell me, which president's story inspired you the most? And who should we explore next? Like, comment, subscribe, because the next video will be even more incredible.